Welcome to Outside Views EU. Today we're going to explore one of the most complex and evolving topics in European politics, the EU's relationship with Russia, Ukraine and the Eastern Partnership countries. This is a geopolitical issue that has dominated European headlines for years, especially with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. But to understand the present, we first need to take a step back and look at the broader context. The Eastern Partnership is an initiative that was launched by the EU in 2009. It was a goal to build stronger political and economic ties with 6 countries in Eastern Europe and the South Caucasus: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. The idea was to create a ring of stability and prosperity around the EU's eastern borders. But from the start, this initiative was seen by Russia as a challenge to its traditional sphere of influence. Russia has always had a complicated relationship with its neighbors in Eastern Europe, seeing them as both a buffer zone and an extension of its geopolitical power. So when the EU started deepening its ties with these countries, particularly Ukraine, it raised alarms in Moscow. Ukraine, of course, sits at the heart of the story. For many years, Ukraine has been caught between the EU and Russia, trying to balance its Western ambitions with the reality of its historical ties to Russia. In 2014, that balance collapsed. The Ukrainian government's decision to suspend a planned association agreement with the EU in favor of closer ties with Russia sparked massive protests. These protests, known as the Euromaidan, led to the ousting of Ukraine's pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych. In response, Russia annexed Crimea and provided support to separatist movements in eastern Ukraine, leading to an ongoing war that has claimed thousands of lives. Since then, Ukraine has become a focal point of EU foreign policy. The EU has provided Ukraine with significant financial, political, and humanitarian support. It has imposed sanctions on Russia in response to its actions in Ukraine, including the annexation of Crimea and its role in the Donbas conflict. At the same time, the EU has worked to help Ukraine implement reforms, especially in the areas of governance, the rule of law, and anti-corruption efforts. But despite this effort, the road ahead for Ukraine remains difficult. The war Russia started now continues, and while Ukraine has made progress in some areas, corruption and political instability remain major challenges. But now let's turn to Russia. The EU's relationship with Russia is arguably at its lowest point since the end of the Cold War. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 marked a turning point, leading to sanctions from the EU and a freeze in relations. And these sanctions target sectors like energy, finance and defense, and they have had a significant impact on the Russian economy. But despite this, Russia has continued to pursue an aggressive foreign policy, not just in Ukraine, but also in other parts of Europe and beyond. From cyber attacks on European countries to disinformation campaigns and military interventions in Syria, Russia has consistently challenged the EU's influence. The EU, for its part, has struggled to find a unified response to Russia. While countries like Poland and the Baltic states favor a hardline approach, others like Germany and France have sought dialogue and engagement for a long time, especially when it came to issues like energy. The EU's reliance on Russian gas has also complicated the relationship. Nord Stream 2, the controversial pipeline that bypassed Ukraine and delivered Russian gas directly to Germany, has been a major point of contention within the EU and between the EU and the United States. Critics always argued that the pipeline increased Europe's energy dependence on Russia at a time when relations were already strained. But proponents, particularly in Germany, saw it as an economic project that shouldn't be politicized. And then there's Belarus, one of the Eastern Partnership countries that has remained closely aligned with Russia. In 2020, massive protests erupted in Belarus following a widely disputed presidential election. The EU has condemned the Belarusian government's crackdown on protesters and impose sanctions on the regime. But Belarus, under President Alexander Lukashenko, has leaned even more heavily on Russia for support. And this has further deepened the divide between the EU and Belarus, making any kind of a rapprochement seem unlikely in the near future. Georgia and Moldova, on the other hand, have taken a different path. Both countries have sought closer ties with the EU, signing association agreements and making progress on reforms. But they too face challenges from Russia. In Georgia, Russian troops continue to occupy the breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. In Moldova, Russia backs the separatist region of Transnistria. And these frozen conflicts are a constant source of tension and make it difficult for these countries to fully integrate with the EU. Azerbaijan and Armenia, two other Eastern Partnership countries, present their own set of challenges. Both countries are strategically important due to their location and their energy resources. But the conflict between them over Nagorno-Karabakh complicates the EU's ability to engage with them effectively. The recent war in Nagorno-Karabakh, which ended with a Russian-brokered ceasefire, has further highlighted Russia's role as a key player in the region, often at the expense of the EU's influence. So where does this leave the EU? The Eastern Partnership was designed to bring stability and closer ties to the EU's eastern neighbors, but it has also revealed the limits of the EU's influence. Russia remains a dominant force in the region, and many of the Eastern Partnership countries continue to be caught between the EU and Russia. At the same time, the war in Ukraine shows no signs of ending, and the EU's relationship with Russia remains fraught with tension. Looking forward, the EU faces several key challenges. First, it must continue to support Ukraine, both in terms of financial aid and political backing. This means maintaining pressure on Russia through sanctions while also helping Ukraine with its internal reforms. Second, the EU must find a way to deal with Russia that balances the need for firmness with the reality of economic and energy interdependence. This will require a unified approach from all member states, something that has proven difficult in the past. And third, the EU must continue to engage with the other Eastern Partnership countries, offering them a viable alternative to Russian influence. This won't be easy, especially in countries like Belarus, where the political situation is so closely tied to Russia. But if the EU wants to maintain its role as a global player, it can't afford to ignore its eastern neighbors. So in conclusion, the EU's relationship with Russia, Ukraine, and the Eastern Partnership countries is one of the most important and one of the most challenging aspects of European foreign security policy today. It's a relationship shaped by history, geography, and politics, and one that will continue to evolve in the coming years. So thanks for watching Outside Views EU, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you next time, and the next video is right here in the end screen.